Okay, hello and welcome to you all. Thanks for coming and sharing part of your day with me. My name is Dave Bruno. I'm your webinar host and facilitator for today's webinar. Let me clear up a little something that some of you may be wondering about. And that is, you might be wondering what the pitch is for today or what will it be? In other words, what will you be asked to buy? And the short and clear answer is there's nothing for you to buy. All you're asked is to approach our discussion with an open mind. And the reason I say that is because today's discussion is about something that I'm confident most of you have not heard about, read about, or covered in a course or seminar about running a small business. With that little appetizer, let's get right into our main course, the one thing that is 100% guaranteed to kill a small business, and most importantly, what to do about it. We'll take our cue today from the story we've all heard a million times in various forms, and that's the story of the dog chasing the car. You know the story. The dog chases the car, the dog catches the car, and then the dog says to himself, well, what happens now? What do I do with it? We can all relate to this story because it's a metaphor of a pretty common and almost universal human activity, which is basically pursuing something relentlessly and with all our passion that we deeply desire. But every once in a while, the dog catches the car. We get what we're chasing. What happens then? For our discussion today, the dog is us. The car is symbolic of what we want most for our businesses. The question is, what happens when we get what we want most? This is what we'll be talking about today. We have three goals for you in today's webinar. The first is to give you a realistic view of small business evolution, to illuminate that and define that for you. Secondly, to give you an alternate, and I believe more realistically grounded perspective of how business evolution links directly to the thing you want most for your business. And third, to give you a business evolution journey map you can use as a management development guide in your business. With these three things, you'll have very powerful tools to proactively manage and guide your small business's evolution. A little bit about housekeeping, though, before we get further in. Our session today will run about 20 to 25 minutes. We'll have a question and answer session after the main presentation, which will last maybe about 15 minutes, maybe less. If you have questions that occur to you during the presentation, send your questions through the control panel. I'll answer them after the presentation. And finally, you'll receive instructions on downloading this slide deck and the session recording within 48 hours after the session ends. Our theme today will be basically be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it. This is the dilemma of the dog when it catches the car. What now? Every business of any shape, size, and tenure has this experience and dilemma, and sometimes more than once in their business life. Some of these businesses are consciously and proactively aware of what's going on and what's causing it, and others aren't. In my experience, the ones that aren't aware generally tend to be those small businesses that get into trouble, frequently struggle, and sadly, chronically stagnate. And a few of them, tragically, die well before their time. A big part of today's webinar is to give you an answer to the what now question. Let me give you a little background, a little sketch of my background, because you may be wondering who this person is that's talking with you today. I'm a small business management coach and advisor, and have been for 20 years in the Chicago metro area. I'm the founder and principal of a firm called Third Nature Chicago. I'm also the publisher and principal author of an online free publication dedicated and devoted to small business owners and leaders, and that's called the Small Business Owner's Manual. I intimately understand small businesses, and I know firsthand that, unlike some other popular opinion, small businesses are not just smaller versions of bigger ones. I greatly respect and admire small business owners and founders. They have what I consider to be the unique courage and internal wherewithal to create something from nothing and really literally operate every day without a safety net. That's something that only a relatively few human beings can actively have the ability to do and the capability to do. But last but not least, I want to give you a personal insight from my own background and story. I know firsthand how it feels for someone to lose their small businesses. My father lost his when I was a young boy. I've never forgotten the look in his eyes of devastation and embarrassment when he came home and told us that the business, his business, our business, was gone and was not coming back. I can assure you, when you're experiencing something that devastating and emotionally profound in the eyes of someone that you love and care for, you'll never forget it. Our agenda today is really pretty straightforward and comprised of three phases, if you will, or items. The first is to give you the 4 stages of business evolution. The second is to give you the characteristics and challenges of those stages, and that will be enclosed within a matrix of giving you the 4 stages of evolution and what characterizes them and what the challenges are of each of those stages. And lastly, to give you an antidote, or consider it to be kind of a recipe of what to do when your business starts showing stress symptoms. And trust me, it will, if it hasn't already. So let's get into, what do small businesses and small business owners want more than anything else? You know the answer to that. It's growth. Growth and more growth, success and more of just about everything. In all my years of coaching and advising small business owners, I've never heard even one of them say that they didn't want to grow and have more of everything. But today I'd like to debunk a persistent business myth with you. You know the one. If you're not growing, you're dying. You've heard that probably hundreds of times, if not thousands. I firmly believe that if you're not improving some aspects of your business as you're evolving, you're dying. I believe that's more accurate, more actionable, and I coach my clients in that principle. Over the years, I've asked myself many times the question, why do small business owners want growth for their businesses more than just about anything else? And I've concluded that there's a pretty simple answer to that. And the answer is primarily because everything and everybody tells them that they should grow and grow and grow some more so that their businesses won't die. Like all living things, all businesses evolve. Everything in nature that exists evolves and changes and takes on more complex forms. If evolution didn't exist, somebody would need to invent it, because without it, none of us would be who we are, and our world as we know it would not exist. Businesses of all sizes go through very specific and knowable stages of evolution and change on a pathway from relative simplicity to greater complexity. The 4 stages of business evolution are startup, early maturity, full maturity, and exit, transformation, or termination. More about this a little bit later. But right now, let's look at what drives business evolution. In a word, growth. The primary driver of all evolution in all things is growth and change in complexity. So it turns out that the very thing that all of us, all small business owners, want most for their business is the very thing that drives all business evolution in the first place. Let me put it more succinctly. Growth and change is inevitable and can't be stopped. Growth generates more of everything. And the more of everything generates change. The fundamental characteristic of growth is that it produces more of just about everything. As change occurs in a business because more of everything is created, complexity naturally follows. So in other words, as your businesses evolve from their earlier stages through the various evolutionary stages later on, your businesses naturally become more complex. And the more complex they become, the more some anecdotal things are necessary to ensure that that's sustainable. So we can say that growth brings about more, and more brings about change, and that change brings about complexity. It's as sure and certain as the sun rising every day in the east. Think about it. Without growth and change, none of our businesses would look, act, and be any different than they were on the very first day of their existence. Consider what that means for a moment. Without growth-fueled and powered evolution and change, our economy as we know it just simply would not exist. Well, all that's well and good, you might say, about this point, but what does all this stuff about evolution have to do with me and my business and about making money? That's a fair question. If I were in your shoes right about now, I'd probably be wondering and asking the same thing. So in other words, the question really is, what's the so what about all of this? Well, the short answer to that question is the so what is just about everything. Business evolution, I can assure you, is not just an interesting academic and abstract concept. The evolutionary process in every business on the planet affects just about everything we do and don't do in our businesses every day. The problem is we don't know it's happening because it's hidden by the day-to-day demands we all face in running our businesses, serving our customers, and dealing with all of the uncountable and myriad problems that always come up in any small business. So the so what is that business stagnation, decline, and possible death lies within the very thing we want and work so hard for, growth. A tremendous amount of research has occurred over many years by various academic and governmental institutions about the exact causes of most business failures. The primary causes are listed here for you. The last two, however, are the most interesting to me because they're the direct result of growth in a business without any changes in how those businesses are actually run and managed. Growth without change in how we manage our business means that we assume that growth comes without cost of any kind. I can assure you that growth always has costs. Sometimes those costs are financial in terms. Sometimes they're human terms. Almost always they're operational costs. And most importantly, and most universally, disruption in the status quo of how the businesses do what they do is always a cost of growth. Here's the matrix that I was referencing for you earlier about small business evolution stages, and it's a view from what I call about a 10,000 foot up elevation. So it's not intended to give you a ground level granular view of the various stages and what's going on in them. but it gives you enough to give you a pretty good roadmap and management guide to understanding what your businesses are going through as they go through these various stages. So for our purposes today, let's look at just one of the stages. Let's say early maturity, the second stage in the far left-hand column, vertical column, which you'll see in that column the four stages of startup, early maturity, full maturity, and transformation or termination. And let's take a look at the second stage, early maturity, and just see how this matrix works. The primary characteristics of a business in early maturity is that the business has arrived at the place where it's self-sustaining on a cash basis. It's operating pretty much in an arm's length market, meaning that it's not reliant anymore on the friends, family, and personal contacts that were kind of prevalent in the startup stages to do business. The owners of the business are still pretty much underpaid, and in many cases still only sporadically paid. All the decisions in the business are still made by the owners. All the roads in the business lead to the owners for decisions and for direction. The business it's an early maturity stage business almost always has an underdeveloped financial management system, process, and practices, and an equally underdeveloped business goal setting management process. The essential objectives of an early maturity stage small business is to refine, hone, and improve the business model that was discovered in the startup stage, to increase owner compensation to a higher level and more consistent level, to improve gross and operating margins, to generate consistently positive cash flow, and to generally professionalize the business management systems within the business. The challenges of an early maturity small business is that we arrive at early maturity with little or no real management systems. There's still a tendency amongst the owners and founders of the business to cast what I call too wide a net in their sales model, meaning that they're trying to be all things to all people still, which was more common in the startup stage. They have relatively little performance management systems and processes, and they have many more moving parts to manage. And their prices for their products and services are still probably way too low, because low prices for both products and services are very common in early stage businesses. So the developmental needs of a early maturity business is to upgrade and professionalize their financial management systems, professionalize their sales model and processes, to install performance management systems and processes, upgrade the business goal setting and management processes, and gradually increase their prices for their products and services to a more market level and a more profitable and sustainable level. So basically, that's a look at the matrix in using one of the stages to talk about how we can use the matrix to help us understand where our businesses are, and understanding what our objectives are, and what our challenges probably are or will be, and what the developmental needs of our businesses are in that stage. You can examine the matrix in more detail later on when you get this slide deck after the webinar. But before we leave the matrix, there's one thing I'd like to draw your attention to. There's a reference to a person by the name of Steve Blank at the bottom left of the matrix. That's not intended or meant to be a teaser. You'll hear more about him and more about Steve in a couple of minutes. But now let's highlight some things from the matrix. First of all, I'd like to give you the awareness that elapsed time is not an evolutionary driver. In other words, time by itself, the passage of time by itself, is not a driver of evolution, either of businesses or anything else. The evolutionary pathway of all of the stages is from comparative simplicity to greater complexity. And as change occurs in each of those four stages, the management systems and the processes of the business must change and must get better. the business focus morphs from entrepreneurship to enterprise management. And there's danger, great danger, to the business when the management processes of the business don't change as the business grows and changes. Disruption, which is a all the time characteristic, it's a universal consequence of each transition from one stage to the next. Disruption must be embraced and nurtured, not avoided. Disruption is the first and best clue that tells us where and how our business must change and get better in order to align with the growth that it is experiencing. The highest risk and most dangerous time in a small business's evolution is the time in the transition from startup to early maturity. Why might that be, you might ask? Well, when an organization exits its startup stage and successfully emerges from its startup stage, there's a natural tendency on the part of the owners and founders of the business to kind of breathe a sigh of relief and kind of think to themselves, or maybe to each other, we made it. We're now a real business. All the while being unaware that evolution is actively occurring, even as they congratulate each other, and as they should, about being successfully emerging from startup to early maturity. There's a natural tendency on their part to manage the now early maturity business on a day-to-day basis pretty much as they did when the business was in the startup stage. That's okay for a while, but eventually the owners must understand that their business has now traveled to another phase and place and must change how and what it does accordingly. I mentioned a few minutes ago Steve Blank, a fellow by the name of Steve Blank. If you don't know Steve, I'm going to encourage you to get to know who he is and what he does, and the fact that he's an acknowledged and well-known leading thinker in the art and science of effective startup business organizations. His website is steveblank.com. Again, if you're not familiar with Steve's work and thinking, I really encourage you to become more familiar and visit his website. He said in one of his very well-known books, The 4 Steps to Epiphany, he stated in the book this quote: I happen to think that this is one of the most brilliant observations anybody's ever made about the startup stage of a business. And Steve said, quote, startups are temporary organizations. Notice the phrase temporary organizations, on a mission to find a scalable business model. Once that business model is found, a quote, real, unquote, company is born to execute on it. So in other words, what Steve is saying is that startups, even though they look and act and sound and operate from the outside looking in as businesses, as regular businesses, they're in reality temporary organizations on a quest, on a mission to find a scalable business model that can be repeated and repeated profitably and with high levels of customer satisfaction. And they're saying that once that business model is found, then and only then is a real company born to continue to execute on it and refine and hone it. So go to Steve's website, spend some time learning about Steve and his work with startup organizations. And that's particularly true if your business is in the startup stage or has recently emerged from the startup stage of its development and evolution. So growth isn't just about getting bigger and getting more. Remember our formula: growth equals more and more equals change. To their detriment, many small business owners transitioning from startup to early maturity don't focus enough management attention on the change part of that equation. And I'm guessing that right about now you're asking yourself, Well, how the heck, Dave, can you know whether your business has transitioned from one stage to another? Again, a great question. And the answer to that question is we know that we've emerged from, or we are emerging and transitioning from one stage to the next because of the stress and disruption that's occurring within our businesses. Stress and disruption is the very best way to know you're in a transition between stages. Listed for you here are about 8 stress symptoms, what I call stressors, that a lot of businesses experience at various stages of their evolution and growth and transition. Cash flow is often squeezed. Vendors and partners aren't being paid on time. They're being used as basically non-interest bearing loans. More revenue is being produced and yet less cash is being generated. Projects aren't completed on time with high quality results, and product and service quality is declining and is often sporadic. The rivets and seams of the business basically are being pushed and stressed harder and harder. I encourage you to embrace those stressors and pay close attention to them. They will tell you exactly where you need to build, install, improve, and expand your management systems and practices to effectively handle current growth. So now that we've developed the reality of small business evolution and change and growth, and the fact that within growth lies the very seeds of our struggle and potentially even business death, the question is now, what do we do about it? So if we find ourselves in a situation where our businesses are experiencing significant stress, what do we do about it? In other words, it's the dog says, now what do I do when I get the car? And here's the answer. The first thing we need to do about it is to know what stage we're in. You've got 2 really powerful tools to help you make that a clear-eyed assessment. One is the matrix that we explored a little while ago, the business evolution matrix, and the other are the stressors that you're experiencing. So once you're using those 2 tools, then we can conduct an assessment, a clear-eyed assessment of our management structures and practices, paying close attention to the stressors in the business, because again, those stressors are stage markers. They're like signposts, billboards, to let us know that we're probably emerging from one stage of our business to another. Use the evolution stages matrix as a guide, as an active management guide. Keep it close and keep it handy for yourselves to review. Get other opinions from people that you know and trust and whose business acumen you admire. And lastly, mirror your growth with your business's ability to effectively manage it. So let's summarize. Growth is good when it's controlled. Growth is highly dangerous and potentially fatally dangerous when it's uncontrolled and allowed to disrupt the business's ability to absorb and manage it. When you catch what you're chasing, control it, use it, and adjust your business's management capacities to mirror it. And keep growing and keep thriving.